Hello, and welcome to the Rainbow Romance channel. First of all, I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Your interest and support means so much to me and give me the motivation to keep creating better, more meaningful stories every day. If you enjoy what we share here, do not forget to hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Turn on notifications so you never miss our newest videos. Thank you so much. And now let us begin. Mason Reed came back to Westbridge University for one reason. Ethan Brooks was going to lose everything. At least, that was the plan. 6 weeks later, Ethan would look him straight in the eyes and ask one question Mason could never prepare himself to answer. Was any of it real? But before that moment, before everything became complicated, Mason still believed revenge was simple. Westbridge looked exactly as he remembered it. All red brick buildings, freshly cut lawns, expensive cars, and students carrying iced coffee like survival equipment. Then there was Mason, 22, dark-haired, sharp-jawed, and unfairly handsome in the kind of reckless American way that made mothers suspicious and strangers look twice. His worn black jacket did not exactly blend in with the polished campus crowd. Mason preferred it that way. Across the quad stood the reason he had returned. Ethan Brooks, 21, tall, blonde, blue-eyed, athletic, and so effortlessly handsome, he looked like someone had designed him specifically for a college recruitment brochure. Students waved at him. Professors knew his name. Someone called, "Brooks," from across the lawn, and Ethan answered with that easy smile everyone seemed to love. Mason hated that smile immediately. No, that was not true. He had hated it long before today. His fingers tightened around the old photograph inside his jacket pocket. Tyler was smiling in that picture, back when his younger brother still believed Westbridge would change his life. Before the scholarship disappeared, before the scandal, before the name Ethan Brooks became permanently attached to everything that went wrong. Still playing the perfect hero, Mason murmured. As if the universe had heard him and possessed a cruel sense of humor, Ethan suddenly looked across the quad. Their eyes met. Mason expected indifference, maybe arrogance. Instead, Ethan's smile vanished. For one strange second, the golden boy looked almost afraid. Then he started walking directly toward Mason. That was not part of the plan. Mason had imagined their reunion dozens of times, and in every version, he had control. Yet as Ethan stopped only a few feet away, his expression unreadable, Mason felt the first crack in his carefully rehearsed revenge. "Mason Reed," Ethan said quietly. "You actually came back." Mason forced a crooked smile. "Try not to sound so happy about it, Brooks." Ethan stared at him for another second, then said something Mason had never expected. "You should not have come back." For half a second, Mason forgot every clever answer he had prepared. Ethan Brooks was supposed to be smug, defensive, maybe nervous because the past had finally walked back on a campus wearing black boots and a bad attitude. He was not supposed to sound like he was warning Mason. That almost sounded like concern, Mason said. Ethan glanced around the quad. Students streamed past them beneath the warm September sun, laughing, checking phones, complaining about classes. Nobody seemed to notice the tension sitting between them like an invisible wall. "You do not know what you are getting into," Ethan said. Mason gave him a humorless smile. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing to you." Something flickered across Ethan's face. Recognition, perhaps. Guilt would have been better. Mason wanted guilt. He had spent a year imagining it. But Ethan simply lowered his voice. "Whatever you think happened with Tyler, you do not have the whole story." There it was. Tyler. Mason felt his thoughts sharpen. "Interesting. I never mentioned my brother." Ethan went still. Mason almost smiled. "Almost. So you remember him?" "Of course I remember him. That makes one of us who gets to remember college fondly." Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. Mason watched him carefully. The famous Ethan Brooks suddenly seemed less like a golden statue and more like a young man desperately trying not to say the wrong thing. That bothered Mason more than arrogance would have. "Mason, listen to me. I did enough listening last year. Then ask questions." Mason laughed softly. "You think I came back for answers?" Ethan's blue eyes returned to his. "Why did you come back?" Because Tyler had stopped talking about his future. Because Mason had watched his younger brother pack away a Westbridge sweatshirt he once wore everywhere. Because somebody had walked away untouched while Tyler carried the consequences. Mason said none of that. Instead, he stepped back. "Maybe I missed the cafeteria." Ethan stared at him. You still do that? Do what? Make a joke whenever something matters. The observation landed too accurately. Mason hated that too. Before he could respond, a cheerful voice called Ethan's name from the administration building. A woman holding a clipboard waved urgently. Ethan sighed. I have to go. Golden boy duties? Something like that. He took 2 steps, then stopped. Stay away from this, Mason. Mason tilted his head. From what? Ethan looked as though the answer was already sitting on his tongue. Then the familiar public smile returned, polished and effortless, covering whatever Mason had glimpsed underneath. Exactly, Ethan said and walked away. Mason remained beneath the old oak tree until Ethan disappeared into the administration building. His phone buzzed. A message from his friend Logan appeared on the screen. Everything ready. Just tell me when you want to start. Mason stared at those words. The plan was simple. Ethan Brooks had built his life on being trusted, admired, untouchable. Mason would get close enough to discover what the golden boy was hiding, and then he would let everyone see the truth. Revenge needed patience. More importantly, it needed trust. Mason typed back 2 words. Not yet. 3 hours later, he discovered the universe apparently enjoyed making his life difficult. His faculty advisor handed him a folder for Westbridge's annual homecoming charity campaign and smiled as though delivering wonderful news. You will be coordinating student outreach with Ethan Brooks. Mason blinked. I am sorry. Who? The advisor laughed. You heard me. Mason looked through the glass wall of the office. Ethan stood in the hallway holding an identical folder. Their eyes met again. Ethan looked at his folder, then at Mason, and closed his eyes for one exhausted second. Mason slowly smiled. Maybe the universe was not against him after all. Maybe it had just handed him the perfect way in. Mason had always believed the hardest part of revenge would be getting close to Ethan. He was wrong. The hardest part was pretending he did not enjoy annoying him. Their first homecoming planning meeting began the next morning at 8 inside a quiet student center conference room, where Ethan had already arranged 3 folders, 2 coffees, and a color-coded calendar with the terrifying precision of someone who considered organization a personality trait. Mason dropped into the chair across from him. Tell me one of those coffees is mine. Ethan did not look up. It is. Mason paused. You remembered my order? Black coffee, 2 sugars. Ethan finally met his eyes. You drank it every morning when you were here before. That was inconvenient. Mason picked up the cup, suddenly suspicious of something as harmless as remembering. Careful, Brooks. People might think you like me. People think plenty of things that are not true. The words came quietly. Too quietly. Mason watched Ethan return to the calendar. There it was again, that strange crack beneath the polished surface. Mason reminded himself why he was here. Trust first. Truth second. Destruction last. Simple. All right, Mason said, leaning forward. Temporary ceasefire. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You are proposing peace? Do not make it emotional. We have a fundraiser to survive. And what do you want in exchange? Mason smiled. Smart golden boy. Nothing. That is somehow more concerning. Over the next hour, they divided responsibilities for the homecoming charity campaign. Ethan handled donors and university contacts. Mason took student events and local businesses. They disagreed about almost everything. Ethan wanted schedules. Mason wanted flexibility. Ethan wanted matching volunteer shirts. Mason said matching shirts were how civilizations collapsed. Ethan actually laughed at that, sudden and unguarded. Mason stopped speaking. It was not the public Ethan Brooks laugh, polished for crowds and photographs. This one was softer, younger, real. What? Ethan asked. Nothing. Mason looked down at his folder. That laugh was not useful information. He needed secrets, not evidence that Ethan could be human. By noon, they were walking across campus toward the athletic center to inspect a possible fundraiser location. Ethan greeted nearly everyone they passed. Mason noticed something strange. Ethan knew names, not just athletes and professors. He thanked a groundskeeper named Louise, asked a cafeteria employee whether her daughter liked her new school, held the door for 3 freshmen carrying boxes. Mason found himself increasingly irritated. Could you stop being nice for 5 minutes? Ethan glanced sideways. I am sorry. You are ruining your brand. My brand is being nice. Your brand is being suspiciously perfect. Ethan smiled. And yours is pretending you do not care about anything. Mason's steps slowed. Ethan continued walking. You know nothing about me, Mason said. Ethan stopped several feet ahead. September sunlight caught in his blonde hair as he turned. Maybe not, he said. But I knew Tyler. The name changed everything. Mason's expression hardened. Do not. Ethan's smile disappeared. I am not your enemy, Mason. That is exactly what an enemy would say. Then give me a chance to prove it. Mason stared at him, caught between anger and curiosity. This was supposed to be his game, his trap. Yet somehow Ethan was inviting him closer. Mason's phone buzzed inside his pocket. Logan again. I found something about Brooks. Something big. Mason looked from the message to Ethan. The golden boy waited beneath the bright afternoon sky, calm on the outside, unreadable underneath. Mason slipped the phone away. Fine, he said. Prove it. Ethan's face changed for only a second. Not relief. Fear. For the next 4 days, Mason learned that being forced to work with Ethan Brooks was a special kind of punishment. Not because Ethan was difficult. That would have been convenient. No, Ethan was prepared, patient, irritatingly competent, and somehow capable of making Mason feel guilty for arriving 7 minutes late without saying a single word about it. Do not look at me like that, Mason muttered as he entered the student center Thursday afternoon. Ethan glanced up from his laptop. Like what? Like a disappointed suburban father. I was checking the clock behind you. That is worse. Ethan smiled and slid a stack of sponsor forms across the table. Their homecoming charity campaign had grown quickly. Local restaurants were donating gift cards, alumni were sponsoring events, and the university had approved a Saturday night fundraiser inside the athletic center. It meant more meetings, more phone calls, more hours together. Exactly what Mason had wanted. So why did it no longer feel like winning? His phone vibrated. Logan, I am serious. Call me. What I found changes everything. Mason turned the phone face down. Secret admirer? Ethan asked. Jealous. Terrified for their judgment. Mason gave him an offended look. That almost hurt. Almost. I have survived worse. The joke escaped automatically, but Ethan did not laugh. His gaze lingered on Mason for a second too long. I know, he said. Mason's smile faded. Before he could ask what Ethan meant, the conference room door opened and 2 student volunteers hurried inside. One explained that their outdoor information booth had been double booked with another campus organization. Ethan stood immediately. I will handle it. Mason followed. Of course you will. You do not have to come. And miss watching the golden boy negotiate over 6 feet of sidewalk? Never. 20 minutes later, Mason discovered Ethan was terrible at confrontation when the other person refused to cooperate. He remained polite, then more polite, then painfully polite. Mason finally stepped forward. How about we move our booth near the library entrance? More foot traffic, more shade. Nobody has to fight over a folding table. Silence. Ethan blinked. The other organizer considered it, then nodded. Problem solved. As they walked away, Ethan stared at Mason. What? Mason asked. That was reasonable. Do not spread it around. I am experiencing genuine shock. Mason laughed, and Ethan did too. For a moment, everything felt strangely easy. Then Ethan's phone rang. He checked the screen, and every trace of warmth disappeared from his face. I need to take this. He walked several yards away. Mason tried not to listen. He really did. Then Ethan said, Dad, please. Not here. Mason froze. Ethan turned his back, voice dropping. I'm doing everything you asked. I cannot keep fixing this for you. A pause. Ethan's shoulders tightened. Do not bring Tyler into this. Mason stopped breathing. Tyler. Again. Ethan ended the call and remained perfectly still beneath the library steps. When he finally turned around, Mason was waiting. What does your father have to do with my brother? Mason asked. Ethan went pale. You heard that. Answer me. Not here. You keep saying that. Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice. You told me to ask questions. I am asking. Ethan looked around at the passing students, then back at Mason. For once, there was no polished smile. No golden boy. Just a tired 21-year-old carrying something too heavy behind his eyes. There are things about Tyler that I cannot tell you yet. Mason stared at him. Cannot or will not. Ethan swallowed. Both. That single word should have made Mason furious. Instead, what unsettled him was the fear in Ethan's expression. Mason's phone vibrated again. This time he looked. Logan had sent a photograph of an old university document. Beneath it were 6 words. Brooks knew what happened to Tyler. Mason slowly raised his eyes. Ethan was still watching him. Suddenly, the revenge Mason had planned felt closer than ever. So did the possibility that he had never understood what he was avenging. The document on Mason's phone was only one page, but he read it 3 times before the words began to make sense. Tyler Reed, Scholarship Review Committee, recommendation for suspension of financial aid. Near the bottom was a list of student witnesses, and there it was. Ethan Brooks. Mason stared at the name until the letters blurred together. Logan had added another message. I can get more. Give me a day. Mason locked his phone. Across from him, Ethan stood beneath the library steps with that same guarded expression. You knew, Mason said. Ethan's eyes dropped briefly toward Mason's phone. I knew some of it. Your name is on the report. I know. Then explain it. Ethan opened his mouth, but his phone rang again. The moment he saw the screen, his entire posture changed. His shoulders stiffened. His breathing became shallow. I have to go. Mason almost laughed. Of course you do. Ethan walked away without answering. Mason should have let him. Instead, 10 minutes later, he found Ethan alone inside an empty hallway near the athletic center. The afternoon sun spilled through tall windows, turning the polished floor gold. Ethan stood with one hand against the wall, eyes closed, breathing as if the simple act had become something he needed to remember how to do. Mason stopped. Anger had brought him there. Anger suddenly felt useless. Brooks? Ethan opened his eyes too quickly. I am fine. You look extremely convincing. Mason. What? Please do not make a joke right now. That stopped him. Mason had never heard Ethan sound so tired. He stayed several feet away. No questions. No accusations. Just silence. Ethan slowly sat on a bench beneath the windows. My father has expectations, he said after a while. That sounds normal. Not as kind. Ethan rubbed his palms together. Perfect grades. Perfect reputation. Perfect future. Every mistake becomes a family emergency. Mason leaned against the opposite wall. Being everybody's favorite must be exhausting. Ethan gave a small laugh, without humor. You think I like this? Mason looked at him. Really looked. The expensive watch. The clean white shirt. The blonde hair that somehow always looked camera-ready. Everything about Ethan said effortless. Nothing about the young man sitting in front of him looked effortless now. Why Tyler? Mason asked quietly. Ethan's face tightened. I cannot tell you yet. You keep saying that. Because if I tell you before I can prove it, you will do exactly what Tyler did. Mason straightened. What does that mean? Ethan immediately regretted the words. Mason could see it. Ethan, I am trying to protect you. From who? Ethan looked toward the windows. Someone who has spent a very long time making sure people only see what he wants them to see. Mason's thoughts went to the phone call. Dad, please. Not here. A cold understanding began forming, incomplete and dangerous. Your father? Ethan said nothing. That silence answered too much. Mason's phone buzzed again. Logan, I found the original witness statement. Want me to send it? Mason stared at the message. This was what he had wanted. Evidence. Leverage. A weakness he could use. He looked back at Ethan, who was still trying to steady his breathing while pretending he was not. Mason typed one sentence. Hold it for now. His thumb hovered before sending. Revenge had been easy when Ethan was only a name on a document. It was becoming much harder now that Mason had seen the person underneath it. Ethan looked up. Why are you still here? Mason slipped the phone into his pocket. Because somebody has to make sure Westbridge's golden boy does not collapse from excessive perfection. Ethan smiled despite himself. Mason smiled back, then immediately wished he had not. Because for the first time since returning to Westbridge, he had been given the perfect opportunity to use Ethan's weakness against him. And he had chosen to protect it instead. By Friday afternoon, Mason had made a discovery he considered deeply inconvenient. Protecting Ethan once had apparently become a habit. The homecoming charity campaign had taken over the center of campus, with folding tables, donation signs, student volunteers, and enough school spirit to make Mason feel personally threatened. He was carrying a box of raffle tickets toward the registration booth when he heard his name. Reed. Mason turned. Connor Hayes, a senior on the student council, stood beside 2 volunteers wearing the expression of someone who had been waiting all day to feel important. We are missing $300 from yesterday's cash donations. Mason set the box down. That sounds like a problem. Connor folded his arms. You were the last person listed in the storage room. Around them, conversations began getting quieter. Mason recognized the feeling immediately. Suspicion had a sound. It was silence with an audience. So, Mason asked, so you disappeared for almost an hour afterward. Mason almost smiled. Of course. The bad boy returned to campus. Money disappeared. And suddenly, everyone became a detective. If you are accusing me of something, Connor, try using the actual words. Connor hesitated. That was when Ethan appeared. He did not take it. His voice was calm, but the crowd shifted anyway. Ethan walked directly beside Mason. Connor frowned. You cannot know that. Actually, I can. Mason was with me during that hour. Mason looked at Ethan. That was not entirely true. They had been together for part of it. Ethan continued before Mason could speak. And the donation envelopes were transferred to the finance office yesterday afternoon. I signed the transfer sheet myself. Connor's confidence weakened. Then why is the count short? Because, Ethan said, opening his laptop, one sponsor changed a $300 cash pledge to an online payment this morning. The dashboard has not updated yet. Silence. Different kind this time. Connor muttered an apology and walked away. Mason watched him go, then turned to Ethan. You know I could have handled that. I know. Then why did you step in? Ethan closed his laptop. Because they were wrong. The answer was so simple that Mason had nowhere to put it. People believe you, Mason said. Ethan shrugged. Sometimes. You could have stayed quiet. Ethan's expression changed. I have done enough of that. Mason felt those words settle between them. Tyler again, even without Tyler's name. Later that evening, they sat alone on the bleachers inside the athletic center, surrounded by half-finished homecoming decorations. Mason handed Ethan a soda from the vending machine. Peace offering. Ethan accepted it. For what? I have not decided yet. Ethan laughed softly. Mason looked away before that sound could do anything inconvenient to his thoughts. His phone buzzed. Logan. Last chance. I can send you the original statement tonight. Mason stared at the message. Everything he had come back for was one tap away. Bad news. Ethan asked. Mason locked the screen. Something like that. Ethan nodded without pressing. That somehow made it worse. Mason glanced at him. Why did you defend Tyler? Ethan went still. What? You heard me. Mason kept his voice quiet. I know you were involved in the scholarship review. I also know there is more to it. Ethan stared at the unopened soda in his hands. I tried, he said finally. Tried what? To stop what happened. Mason's chest tightened. Then why did Tyler think you betrayed him? Ethan looked at him, and the sadness in his blue eyes was immediate and unguarded. Because I let him. Mason forgot how to answer. Ethan stood. I need a little more time. Ethan. Please. He walked toward the exit, leaving Mason alone beneath the bright gym lights. Mason pulled out his phone and opened Logan's message again. His revenge had depended on proving Ethan guilty. Now the one thing Mason feared most was discovering that Ethan had been innocent all along. Saturday should have been simple. Finish the homecoming setup, test the sound system, go home, and avoid thinking about Ethan Brooks until Monday. Instead, by 7 that evening, rain hammered the athletic center windows so hard that campus security asked everyone to stay inside until the storm passed. Volunteers disappeared in groups, leaving Mason and Ethan alone near the bleachers with cardboard signs, extension cords, and 40 boxes of decorations. Perfect, Mason muttered. Ethan looked toward the windows. You afraid of rain? No. I am afraid of spending another hour with your color-coded spreadsheets. Those spreadsheets saved us 4 hours yesterday. That is exactly the kind of thing a spreadsheet would want you to believe. Ethan laughed. Mason hated how easily he could recognize Ethan's real laugh now. Worse, he had started waiting for it. They worked quietly for 20 minutes before the lights flickered. Ethan froze. Mason noticed immediately. Hey, I am fine. You really need a second sentence. Ethan sat on the lowest bleacher and rubbed his hands together. My father called again. Mason stopped arranging signs. About Tyler? About everything. Rain rolled against the roof in waves. Mason sat several feet away, leaving space between them. Ethan stared across the empty gym. Do you know what everyone says about me? I have a list. I am serious. Mason softened. Golden boy. Perfect student. Perfect athlete. Future success story. Ethan smiled bitterly. Exactly. Do you know what happens when you spend your whole life being told you cannot disappoint anyone? Mason waited. Eventually, you stop knowing what you actually want. The words were quiet enough to disappear beneath the rain. Mason looked at Ethan's profile, at the exhaustion hidden beneath everything polished and bright. I always thought guys like you had it easy. Ethan glanced at him. Guys like me. Beautiful, popular, everybody cheering when you enter a room. Ethan blinked. Did you just call me beautiful? Mason's brain immediately requested an emergency evacuation. That is what you heard. Very clearly. I was speaking objectively. Ethan smiled. Of course. Do not make this weird. You made it weird. Mason laughed despite himself. The tension loosened, then settled into something quieter. Ethan looked down at his hands. I envy you sometimes. That might be the most concerning thing you have ever said. You do what you want. You say what you think. You walk into a room and do not care whether anyone approves. Mason's smile faded. That is not courage, Ethan. Sometimes it is just easier to pretend nobody matters. Ethan looked at him then. Really looked. Does Tyler matter? Mason swallowed. More than anyone. Then you understand why sometimes people make terrible choices because they think they are protecting someone. Mason turned toward him. Is that what you did? Ethan's expression closed slightly. Yes. For Tyler. A long silence. Partly. Mason leaned forward. Then tell me the rest. Ethan shook his head. I cannot. Frustration rose immediately. You keep asking me to trust you while giving me nothing. Because the truth does not only belong to me. That is convenient. Ethan stood. You think I do not know that? His voice cracked with something Mason had never heard from him before. You came back already convinced I was guilty. Every time you look at me, I can practically see the verdict. Mason stood too. Maybe you earned it. Ethan stared at him, hurt flashing across his face before disappearing. Mason regretted the words instantly. Ethan, I did not mean. Yes, you did. Ethan turned away. Mason reached for his arm, then stopped before touching him. Wait. Ethan looked back. They were suddenly close enough that Mason forgot what he intended to say. The rain filled the silence. Ethan's eyes dropped briefly toward Mason's hand, then returned to his face. Neither moved. Mason felt something frighteningly simple become clear. He did not want to ruin this man anymore. He wanted to understand him. Ethan whispered, Why are you looking at me like that? Mason stepped back. I do not know. His phone buzzed. Logan's name appeared beside a new message. I sent the original statement. Read it before you trust Brooks. Mason looked at Ethan, then at the phone. For the first time, he was afraid to open the truth. Mason did not open Logan's message. Not that night. Not while Ethan stood 10 feet away pretending to reorganize decorations that were already organized. The storm softened around 9, and campus security finally cleared them to leave, but something between them had changed. Mason felt it in the silence as they walked across the wet campus beneath separate umbrellas. Ethan usually filled awkward moments with practical questions. Mason usually destroyed them with jokes. Tonight, neither tried. At the parking lot, Ethan stopped beside his silver sedan. Good night, Mason. That is it. Ethan looked confused. Were you expecting a formal ceremony? Mason smiled. There you are. Where? The annoying version. Ethan laughed, and Mason felt that ridiculous warmth again. Dangerous. Extremely dangerous. Sunday morning, Mason finally opened the document Logan had sent. Ethan's original witness statement was longer than the committee summary. Mason read every line. Then again, Ethan had confirmed that Tyler attended the disputed scholarship meeting, but nowhere did he accuse Tyler of dishonesty. In fact, one sentence made Mason sit upright. I believe Tyler Reed should be given an opportunity to provide his own evidence before any disciplinary decision is made. Mason stared at it. That was not betrayal. It was not proof of innocence either, but the clean story Mason had carried for a year suddenly had cracks everywhere. Logan called. Tell me you read it. I read it. There is more. Mason closed his eyes. Of course there is. Someone removed pages from the committee archive. I am trying to figure out who. Mason looked toward the photograph of Tyler on his desk. Do not do anything yet. Logan went quiet. You are getting close to Brooks, are you not? That was the plan. I mean actually close. Mason did not answer. Monday made the question harder to avoid. Ethan appeared outside Mason's afternoon class holding 2 coffees. Peace offering, he said. Mason accepted one. For what? I have not decided yet. Mason stared at him. You stole my line. I improved it. They walked toward the student center, shoulders occasionally brushing as students moved around them. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the problem. Mason liked the ordinary things too much. Ethan remembering his coffee. Ethan sending him terrible fundraiser slogans at midnight. Ethan quietly saving him a seat. Revenge had prepared Mason for secrets, not tenderness. By Wednesday, Ethan had become the person Mason looked for first when entering a room. That realization nearly ruined his entire morning. That evening, they stayed late reviewing donation totals. Ethan closed his laptop and looked at Mason. "Can I ask you something? You usually do without permission. Why did you really come back?" Mason's chest tightened. "We have covered this." "No. You joke. I let you." Ethan's voice softened. "But I want the truth." Mason looked away. There it was. The question he could not answer without destroying whatever this had become. "Maybe I wanted to know whether I was wrong about you." Ethan studied him. "And?" Mason met his eyes. "I think I was." Ethan went completely still. The room seemed suddenly too quiet. "Mason, do not." "Do not what?" "Look relieved. It makes this worse." Ethan stepped closer. "Why?" Mason could have lied. Instead, he whispered, "Because I am starting to care what you think of me." Ethan's expression softened. For one suspended second, neither moved. Then Ethan leaned forward and pressed a brief, gentle kiss to Mason's lips. He immediately stepped back, eyes wide. "I am sorry. I should have asked." Mason's thoughts vanished. "No. I mean, yes, asking is generally considered useful, but..." Ethan started laughing. Mason laughed too, nervous and helpless. Then his phone vibrated across the table. The screen lit up between them. "Logan, everything is ready. Say the word, and everyone will know who Ethan Brooks really is." Ethan glanced at the screen. Mason reached for the phone too late. The warmth disappeared from Ethan's face. "What?" Ethan asked quietly. "Is that supposed to mean?" Mason's hand closed around the phone, but there was no believable explanation waiting inside it. Ethan remained perfectly still across the table. 5 seconds earlier, his face had been warm with embarrassment from the kiss. Now every trace of softness was gone. "It is complicated," Mason said. Ethan gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "That sentence has never improved anything. Logan is a friend. I figured that part out." Ethan pointed toward the phone. "Why is your friend preparing to tell everyone who I really am?" Mason's mind raced through excuses, each worse than the last. "It started before I knew you." Ethan's expression changed. Not anger. Understanding. Somehow that was worse. "This is about Tyler." Mason said nothing. Ethan stepped back. "You came here looking for something on me." "Yes." The truth tasted terrible, but another lie would be worse. "I thought you destroyed Tyler's scholarship. I thought you walked away while he lost everything. So you decided to destroy me back?" Mason looked down. That was the idea. Silence stretched between them. Ethan glanced at the table where their coffees sat beside donation forms and handwritten fundraiser notes. Ordinary evidence of weeks Mason had not planned to enjoy. "And now?" Ethan asked. Mason lifted his eyes. "Now I am trying to stop it." "Trying." "Logan has copies of documents." I asked him to wait. Ethan's face went pale. "What documents?" "Committee records. Your witness statement. Some financial reports." Ethan moved toward him immediately. "Mason, you need to tell him to stop digging." "Why?" "Because this is bigger than my reputation." "Then tell me what I am missing." Ethan pressed both hands against the edge of the table and closed his eyes. "I cannot explain everything yet." Mason stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." "I am. You just discovered I came back planning revenge, and somehow you are still the one keeping secrets." Ethan looked up. "Because my secret can hurt people besides me." Mason's phone rang. "Logan." Mason answered. "Stop everything." Logan went silent. "You sure?" "Completely." "That might be a problem." Mason's stomach dropped. "Why?" "I shared the archive with someone who helped me access the old records." "He made a copy." Mason stood straighter. "Who?" "A student reporter named Caleb Mercer. He thinks there is a story here." Mason looked at Ethan. "Can you get it back?" "I am trying." "But he mentioned homecoming." The call ended. Mason lowered the phone. Ethan had heard enough. "When?" he asked. "Homecoming is Saturday." "I know when homecoming is." Ethan turned away, breathing slowly. Mason followed him toward the window. "I will fix this." Ethan laughed once. "You do not even know what you started." "Then help me understand." Ethan looked at him for a long moment before reaching into his backpack. He removed an old envelope, worn along the edges, and placed it on the table. Inside was a photocopy of Tyler's scholarship review record. Mason recognized the document immediately, but this copy had something the digital version did not. A handwritten note in the margin. Review initiated at request of Richard Brooks. Mason read the name twice. Your father. Ethan nodded. The committee was ready to let Tyler defend himself. My father intervened. Mason felt the room narrow around him. Why? That is the part one had been trying to prove. Ethan pulled out another page. Tyler found irregularities in a scholarship fund managed by one of my father's foundations. He asked questions. After that, suddenly Tyler became the problem. Mason stared at the paper. For a year, he had built his anger around Ethan. Every plan, every accusation, every imagined victory. Your witness statement, Mason whispered. I was trying to help Tyler, Ethan said. My father found out. He told me that if I challenged the committee publicly, Tyler would lose any chance of appeal. So I stayed quiet. Mason finally understood Ethan's words from the bleachers. Because I let him. Tyler thought you betrayed him. Yes. Ethan's voice broke softly. And I let him hate me because I thought silence would protect his future. Mason looked at Ethan, then at Logan's last message still glowing on his phone. Everything was ready to expose the wrong person. And somewhere outside that room, someone else already had the files. Mason read the handwritten note again, hoping the name would somehow change. It did not. Richard Brooks, the man Ethan had spent weeks refusing to name, was sitting at the center of everything. How long have you known? Mason asked. Ethan leaned against the table, suddenly looking exhausted. I suspected it last year. I only found that copy 3 months ago. And you never told Tyler? I tried to contact him. Ethan looked down. He never answered. Mason understood why. Tyler had deleted half his old contacts after leaving Westbridge. Ethan Brooks had probably been the first. Why did your father care about one scholarship student asking questions? Ethan hesitated. Because Tyler noticed money moving between programs that should never have been connected. Nothing he found proved a crime, but it raised questions my father did not want anyone asking. Mason's anger shifted direction so quickly it left him dizzy. He had spent a year blaming the easiest name in front of him. The golden boy. The committee witness. The son carrying his father's last name. I was wrong about you, Mason said. Ethan's eyes met his. Yes. No comfort. No easy forgiveness. Mason deserved that. I am sorry. Ethan swallowed. I believe you. Mason almost relaxed. Then Ethan added, that does not mean I trust you. Fair. Painful, but fair. Mason looked at his phone. Caleb has incomplete records. If he publishes them, your name becomes the headline. Exactly. Then we give him the complete story first. Ethan shook his head. We do not have enough proof. Then we find it. Before Saturday? You are the spreadsheet guy? Schedule a miracle. Ethan stared at him, then laughed despite everything. The sound lasted only a second, but it changed the room. They spent the next 2 days searching through legitimate copies of archived committee correspondence, old emails Ethan had saved, and records Tyler had once forwarded to Mason without explanation. Late Friday evening, Mason found an email buried in an old folder. Tyler had sent it 3 days before losing his scholarship. The message contained no accusation, only a question about why a foundation reimbursement had been charged against student aid. Attached was a reply. From Ethan. Do not send this to anyone else yet. Meet me tomorrow. I think you found something. Mason stopped breathing for a moment. Ethan. Ethan crossed the room and read the screen. His face changed immediately. I thought that email was gone. You believed Tyler. From the beginning. Ethan nodded. He was smart. Smarter than people gave him credit for. Mason sat back, shame settling heavily in his chest. And I came here to ruin you for helping him. Ethan sat beside him. You came here because you love your brother. That does not make what I did right. No, Ethan's shoulder rested lightly against Mason's. But it explains why you were angry. Mason looked at him. You are making it extremely difficult to dislike you. I thought we moved past dislike. Mason remembered the kiss. Apparently, so did Ethan, because both of them suddenly looked anywhere except at each other. That was one kiss, Mason said. I know. A very confusing kiss. You looked pretty confused. I was having a difficult week. Ethan smiled. Obviously, Mason wanted to stay in that small, ridiculous moment. Then Ethan's laptop chimed. A new campus newsletter alert appeared. Homecoming special report coming tomorrow. The secret behind Westbridge's golden boy. Ethan's smile vanished. Mason opened the preview. Caleb had scheduled the story for release during the homecoming ceremony. Worse, the teaser image showed Ethan's witness statement beside Tyler's suspension notice. The exact combination Mason had once planned to use. Ethan stared at the screen. "Tomorrow," he whispered. Mason felt the full weight of his revenge returning like a debt finally due. He closed the laptop. "Then tomorrow, I tell everyone what I did before someone else makes you pay for it." Saturday arrived wrapped in blue skies, marching band music, and enough gold and crimson decorations to make Westbridge look as if the entire university had been polished overnight. Mason hated every cheerful second of it. By noon, hundreds of students, families, and alumni filled the homecoming plaza. Ethan moved through the crowd in a navy blazer and white shirt, smiling for photographs, greeting donors, thanking volunteers. From 20 feet away, he looked perfect again. Mason knew better now. He could see the tension in Ethan's shoulders, the way his fingers tightened around his phone whenever another notification appeared, the way his smile vanished whenever nobody was looking. Mason was looking. He always seemed to be looking lately. At 2:15, Ethan approached him behind the main event tent. Caleb moved the release time. Mason's stomach tightened. When 2:30, 15 minutes. Mason pulled out his phone and called Logan. No answer. Again. Nothing. "I am going to find Caleb," Mason said. Ethan caught his sleeve. "Mason, wait." The small gesture stopped him more effectively than shouting could have. "Do not make another reckless decision because of me." Mason stared at Ethan's hand before meeting his eyes. "That is going to be difficult. Reckless decisions are basically my brand." Ethan did not smile. "I mean it. So do I." At 2:27, phones began buzzing across the plaza. Mason looked around. Too early. Students were already staring at their screens. A link had appeared on the campus social feed. Someone had leaked Caleb's draft before publication. The headline was worse than the teaser. "Golden Boy, Broken Promise. Did Ethan Brooks help silence a scholarship student?" Mason felt cold. "No." Ethan whispered beside him. People started looking their way. The article displayed Tyler's suspension notice, Ethan's witness statement, and selected messages without the missing context. Mason recognized every document. These were the files Logan had collected for him. His revenge. His mistake. Ethan opened the article and scrolled, then stopped. Mason knew exactly what he had found. A message between Mason and Logan from weeks earlier. "Get close first. People reveal more when they trust you." Ethan slowly raised his eyes. The noise of homecoming seemed to disappear. "You planned all of this." Mason's throat tightened. "At the beginning, yes. You wanted me to trust you." "Yes." "The coffee, the meetings, staying late, asking about my father." Ethan's voice remained quiet, which somehow made every word hurt more. "How much of it was part of the plan? Not what happened between us." Ethan laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "How am I supposed to know that?" "Because I stopped the plan." "After you got what you wanted?" "No. After I realized I did not want it anymore." Ethan looked away. Around them, whispers moved through the crowd. Mason stepped closer but kept enough distance to let Ethan choose whether to stay. "Ethan, look at me." Ethan did. His blue eyes were bright with hurt, and Mason suddenly remembered the question from the future he had somehow always been walking toward. Was any of it real? Ethan asked. Mason went pale. There were 100 safer answers. 100 ways to soften the truth. Mason chose none of them. The revenge was. "Then you were." Ethan's expression broke for one brief second. "That is supposed to make me feel better?" "No," Mason's voice dropped. "It is just the truth. You should have told me." "I know. Before I trusted you. I know. Before I—" Ethan stopped. Mason understood the unfinished sentence anyway. "Before I cared. Before I kissed you. Before you became someone who could hurt me." Ethan stepped back. "I cannot do this right now." Mason wanted to follow. He did not. Ethan deserved at least one choice Mason did not manipulate. So Mason watched him disappear into the crowd. Then Mason looked toward the stage, where university officials were preparing the next homecoming announcement. Hundreds of people were still reading a story built from Mason's mistake. His phone finally rang. "Logan." "Mason, I am sorry. I did not leak it." Mason stared at the stage. "It does not matter who leaked it. What are you going to do?" Mason looked at the complete record saved on his phone, then toward the crowd that had already decided Ethan was guilty. For the first time, revenge felt simple again. Only now Mason knew exactly whose reputation he was willing to destroy. His own. Mason did not give himself time to reconsider. If he stopped to think, he might choose the comfortable option, and comfort was exactly what had caused too many people to stay silent already. He walked toward the homecoming stage while the university president finished thanking alumni sponsors. Logan called again. Mason declined the call and sent one message. Send Caleb the complete archive. Everything. Then he climbed the steps beside the stage. A student coordinator hurried toward him. Mason, you cannot just go up there. I know. Then why are you going up there? Mason looked at the microphone. Because I am tired of letting other people tell half the story. Minutes later, the crowd settled into confused silence as Mason stood beneath the Westbridge banner. Hundreds of faces stared back. Somewhere among them was Ethan. Mason could not find him. Maybe that was better. Most of you just read something about Ethan Brooks, Mason began. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. Before you decide what kind of person he is, you should know why those documents were collected. Whispers moved through the plaza. Mason swallowed. I collected them. Silence. I came back to Westbridge believing Ethan was responsible for what happened to my brother, Tyler. I wanted proof. When I could not find it, I decided I would get close enough to Ethan that eventually he would give me something I could use. Mason heard scattered murmurs. He kept going. That message you saw about earning his trust was mine. Not Ethan's. Mine. Saying it publicly should have felt humiliating. Instead, it felt strangely clean. No jokes. No performance. No bad boy mask. Just truth. But the documents being shared today leave out something important. Ethan did not recommend taking Tyler's scholarship. His original statement asked the committee to let Tyler defend himself. Ethan tried to help him. Mason lifted his phone. There are records supporting that, and the complete files have now been sent to the student newspaper and the university administration. Movement near the front caught his attention. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, staring at him. Mason almost lost his place. There is also evidence that the review began after Tyler questioned financial activity connected to a foundation overseen by Richard Brooks. The crowd reacted instantly. Mason raised a hand. That evidence raises questions. It does not prove every answer, and I am not going to pretend it does. That is what started this mess in the first place. People choosing conclusions before they had the whole truth. Ethan's expression changed. Mason looked directly at him. I did that to Ethan. I decided who he was before I knew him. Then I learned the truth too late. His voice softened. Whatever happens to my reputation after today, that belongs to me. Ethan should not carry it. Mason stepped away from the microphone. No dramatic applause followed. He was grateful. This was not a victory. By evening, Westbridge announced an independent review of Tyler's scholarship case and the foundation records. Caleb replaced his article with a correction explaining that the leaked draft had relied on incomplete material. Mason sat alone on the athletic center bleachers afterward, staring at the empty court. His phone contained dozens of messages. Some supportive, some angry. One from Tyler simply said, "Call me when you can." There was nothing from Ethan. Mason told himself that was fair. He had confessed because Ethan deserved the truth, not because Mason deserved forgiveness. Footsteps sounded behind him. Mason looked up too quickly. It was Logan. You look terrible, Logan said. Thank you. I was worried public humiliation might make me glow. Logan sat beside him. For what it is worth, you did the right thing. Mason stared at the court. Eventually. Sometimes eventually is all people manage. Mason's phone buzzed. Both men looked down. Ethan. Mason opened the message with trembling fingers. It contained only 7 words. I heard what you said up there. Mason waited. Nothing else came. Then another message appeared. I still need time. Mason closed his eyes. Painful. Fair. Then a third message arrived. But I do not hate you. Mason read that sentence twice. It was not forgiveness. It was not love. It was barely a beginning. Somehow, that made it mean more. Mason typed carefully. Take all the time you need. He stopped, then added the hardest promise he had ever made. I will not ask you for anything. Across campus, the homecoming lights continued glowing against the October night. Mason had returned to Westbridge determined to take something from Ethan Brooks. Now, for the first time, he cared enough about Ethan to give him the one thing revenge never could. A choice. 3 weeks passed before Ethan asked Mason to meet him. Not in the student center. Not at a crowded coffee shop. Not anywhere that belonged to the version of them built from secrets. Ethan chose the athletic center after closing, when the pool was still and the bleachers were empty. Mason arrived 5 minutes early and immediately hated himself for checking his reflection in the glass doors. "This is not a date," he muttered. "Good to know." Mason turned. Ethan stood behind him in jeans, white sneakers, and a navy Westbridge sweatshirt, his blonde hair slightly messy instead of perfectly arranged. Mason cleared his throat. "You have developed a disturbing habit of appearing whenever I embarrass myself. Maybe you embarrass yourself too often. That explanation feels unnecessarily personal." Ethan smiled. A real smile. Mason had missed it more than he wanted to admit. They sat several feet apart on the lowest bleacher. The university review was still ongoing, but Tyler's scholarship case had officially been reopened. More importantly, Tyler and Ethan had finally spoken. It had lasted nearly 2 hours. Mason had not asked what they said. Some truths belong to the people who live them. "Tyler told me you apologized," Ethan said. "Several times." He said 17. Mason frowned. He counted. "Apparently." Ethan laughed softly. Mason looked toward the quiet pool. "I owe him more than 17. Maybe. But he also said something else." Mason waited. "He said you have spent your whole life trying to protect him, even when nobody asked you to." Mason gave a small smile. "That sounds like Tyler. It also sounds like you." Silence settled between them, comfortable but fragile. Mason resisted the urge to fill it with humor. "I meant what I texted you," he said. "I am not asking for anything. I know. If you brought me here because you feel guilty." "Mason." Ethan turned toward him. "Could you stop assuming what I am going to say?" Mason blinked. "Probably not immediately, but I can begin a personal growth program." Ethan shook his head, smiling. Then his expression softened. "I was angry with you. You had every right. I still am, a little. Also fair. And I do not know how long rebuilding trust takes." Mason nodded. "As long as it takes." Ethan studied him. "That answer is annoyingly mature. Please never repeat that publicly. I have a reputation." Ethan looked down at his hands. "There is something I keep thinking about. Before everything came out, you told me you thought you were wrong about me." Mason remembered. 2 coffees. A quiet hallway. Ethan asking for the truth. "I was wrong." "So was I." Mason frowned. "About what?" Ethan looked at him. "I thought you were fearless." Mason laughed softly. "Absolutely not. I know that now. You are scared all the time. You just move anyway." Mason had no joke for that. Ethan shifted a little closer. Not touching, just closer. "If we started over," Ethan asked, "what would you do differently?" Mason looked at him for a long moment. This was the question that mattered. Not whether Ethan could forgive him. Not whether they could return to what they had been. They could not. Maybe that was the point. "I would tell you the truth before I gave you a reason to care about me." Ethan's eyes softened. "Even if the truth made me hate you? Especially then." Another quiet moment passed. Ethan moved his hand onto the bleacher between them, palm down. Mason looked at it, but did not reach. He had promised Ethan a choice. Ethan noticed. Slowly, deliberately, he moved his hand until his fingers rested against Mason's. Mason exhaled. "Is this part of starting over?" "Maybe. I should warn you. I am terrible at starting over." "Good." Ethan's fingers curled gently around his. "So am I." Mason smiled. "Then we are already doing great." Ethan laughed, and this time Mason let himself enjoy the sound. Outside, October rain began tapping softly against the high windows. Nothing like the storm that had once trapped them together. Mason had returned to Westbridge believing revenge would give Tyler back something that had been stolen from him. Instead, he had learned that anger could point toward the wrong person, that protecting someone without trusting them could become another kind of harm, and that love did not erase what came before it. It asked what you were willing to do next. Mason looked at their joined hands. Ethan leaned his shoulder lightly against his. No promises. No perfect ending. Just truth, forgiveness beginning slowly, and 2 imperfect young men choosing to see where the next day might take them.